Welcome to SoapBox.
But I think there's so much more we can be doing proactively. I think just saying bring it to the front is a little bit of a lazy approach.
This forces that conversation. It forces the thinking, the planning on how we do that giving with warm hands, not cold ones.
I think this one is a topic that's going to start simmering and is then really going to come to a boil in probably Q1 next year. You know, the way they've structured the changes to the rules, you've got some balance.
It's Advisor 3.0 SoapBox edition. Hello and welcome to SoapBox. This is the edition of the Advisor 3.0 podcast where we stand on our metaphorical soapbox and scream our opinions into the ether, pretending that someone is actually listening. I am joined by my co-host today, brother from another mother, Matt Pitcher, and our very, very special guest today is Chartered Financial Planner Lauren Turner, who is also the Head of Financial Planning at TFP Financial Planning. Lauren, welcome to the show.
Perfect. Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to it.
Yes. It's great to have you on the show. Thank you for making the time to be with us today. Matt, how are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Yeah, all good. Looking forward to getting stuck in.
Good stuff. So we've got a couple of topics on the docket today. And as I am holding the microphone, I will go with mine first. So, this is a subject as put forward by none other than yours sincerely. And the question is, has the SpaceX IPO broken indexing, or is it going to? So last week, we witnessed the largest IPO in history when SpaceX went public. Clearly, nobody is talking about this. So seriously. The general view is that the IPO is overpriced and overhyped. And I don't necessarily disagree with that take, or agree, in fact. As a globally diversified index investor, I don't have a view on price either way. I am not supposed to. What I do take issues with is, once again, index investors are cast as the villains, in this drama. The claim goes something like everyone is buying at any price, at any cost, so they can offload it onto index funds, the forced buyers who will, take it at any price. But when you look at this, it just doesn't, it doesn't survive contact with data and evidence. So before we dive into this and into some data points in this, Lauren, do you have a view one way or another? Are clients asking you or speaking to you about this, about SpaceX?
It's not one that clients have yet picked up the phone about, which is surprising because Elon Musk normally attracts quite a bit of attention when he's doing things. But I think really it's interesting when you start reading into it about how big SpaceX appear to be, but actually when you look at what it's going to do to the index, that it's only going to be a minimal holding. So I think it's interesting because it does make passive feel less passive, the fact they're changing entry requirements to get some of these big IPOs in. But I also think it's a time change. Markets are changing and index investors are passive investors. They don't want to be at the forefront of making decisions every day. So in a way, letting them come in early, is that actually beneficial for a client who is index fund tracking the market and letting it do what it does by leaving it there over time?
Yeah. Matt?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's so much to get into here, isn't there, with this one? This is a big topic because there's so much going on. And I must admit, I'm deeply conflicted. I've got a love-hate relationship with Elon. Not that he knows or cares about that. I love his technology. I personally think he's fairly detestable. But we have had clients contacting us, actually, and no one's contacted us and said, we're ambivalent. As you would imagine, we've had some that have contacted us and said, right, I want to be in day one. I want the IPO price. How do I buy it? So we've had some clients who've gone to the direct, because he did open up, he allocated about 30% in the end of the IPO, didn't he, to retail investors, which is very unusual. So a few clients who've gone and bought the IPO directly with some of the direct consumer platforms in the UK, and then they'll, I assume, in specie the shares across at some later juncture. And then we've had some panicking contacting us saying, we don't want to buy it, do not buy at the IPO price. Now, at the risk of dating today's podcast, actually, if you got in at the IPO price, you'd be feeling pretty happy today, to be fair. So you're what, $130 at IPO? I mean, I don't know where we're sat today. I haven't looked at it today, but it was
over 200.
Yeah. So I mean, who knows where it goes from here? But you could conceivably have nearly doubled your investment in the short term. So yeah, it's really relevant. Really interesting what's going on. And as I say, I mean, so much to unpack, including what Lauren said there, really around the index providers and how they're treating it.
Yeah. So we'll come back to the unpacking, but I'm interested, Matt, when people are coming to things, and to you, Lauren, like when client comes to you to express an opinion one way or another, is it based on Elon as a person? Or is it based on his companies, his technologies? What are you hearing from?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting for us, actually, that it's normally the younger people, like our clients' children, that have a bigger problem with Elon. And I think that is a personal thing. But I think I'm not opposed to him. I think that SpaceX, what's behind it, sounds like a really good idea. But I think the magnitude of his wealth puts a lot of people off investing into him. I think that's kind of the feedback we get most. And I think just the American stock market at the moment, all the noise going on about if it's overweight, all the technology stuff, I think that's where a lot of the resistance comes from. And the clients that are more interested in their portfolios, it's normally that point than Elon Musk that is kind of worrying them.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a really interesting point about the personalities. We have a subset of clients where they have got very bespoke portfolios and they can exclude individual companies. And our single biggest exclusion by factor many times is Tesla. So we have clients, quite a lot of clients, who have just a deep objection to Tesla for a variety of reasons. Some to do with his personality, some to do with he's probably directly attributable for hundreds of thousands, if not a million, lives lost over the next decade in the developing world because of what Doge did. So some ethical concerns, some concerns more around governance. So how he's run Tesla. I mean, he's lost control of Tesla, which is interesting. See whether he'll get it back with the SpaceX listing. But so it is the most excluded. But then you asked the people who are interested in investing in it. And I think that's more to do with actually the broader picture with the markets, with 3 big IPOs coming this year. I mean, SpaceX is the biggest one we've ever had. And then we've got another 2 monsters coming down the track. So we've got 3 massive IPOs happening this year with some insane numbers behind them. And so I think that we definitely have a subset of people who are just super interested in the future of AI, of technology, and therefore want to be involved because it feels exciting.
Yeah. I mean, I think, so just on the person, the way I tend to think about this is to, as much as possible, as much as practically possible, to keep my personal opinion and about the individual separate from their work, as it were. And in this case, especially when it touches, investment philosophy, I try very hard to keep those 2 things separate. We should recognize that this guy now is responsible for 2 of the 10 most valuable companies on the planet in this history of mankind. And so for all that you disagree, with him as a person and his politics, I will maybe take some issues with your characterization of his Doge impact. But let's say I agree. You could equally, point to lives being saved by, or potentially saved by, everything from Tesla, self-driving, to, impact on electricity. Sorry, by that I mean the green world, our migration to the green economy. And I mean, impact of SpaceX, potential impact of space. You were at Advisor 3.0, last year, where we had the legendary, the Tim Peake talking about science and impact of space exploration on healthcare. So anyway, my point is sometimes maybe there is a case for trying to separate the two. But let's come back to the issue of the index providers tweaking the rules, not just for SpaceX, but also for the two, maybe even three, when you add Databricks, Anthropics, and OpenAI, potential IPOs coming down the track. Databricks, a smaller one, and, this is where I start. Number one, over the years, we have been told that companies are staying longer, companies are staying private for longer. They're getting bigger and bigger, for a long time. And that somehow that publicly listed investors are losing out, missing out on this incredible growth of what is likely to be the most transformational technology, of our lifetimes. So, but then again, the minute those companies decide that they want to, go public, we're up in arms about everything from their valuation to whether index providers are making room for them in the world that we're in. And so I kind of think, index providers are there to what's the word, to mimic as much as possible the reality that is in the marketplace. Of course, they put guardrails around that. And I will argue that actually we have seen that in this process. So let's say about $15 trillion of indexed asset, broadly speaking. Let's just focus on ETFs and mutual funds and not worried about, direct indexing and all that, which is small anyway. 15 trillion. Of that, 44 is tracking some sort of S&P indices. And S&P in particular made the decision that they're not going to let SpaceX, they're not changing their rules to let SpaceX into the S&P 500, index for at least a year, and only after it becomes a profitable company. And when I looked at the other ones, MSCI hasn't made any change, to there. So add 10% to that, so you get to about more than half of index assets. FTSE, Russell, and Morningstar, which is CPSR, they made some tweaks to refine their rules. But essentially, where you land is, okay, there is a $2 trillion company here, but actually only about 4% of its capital, of its capitalization, let's say 5%, is being floated. So that translates to, 100 billion, let's say. And because of this framework of float adjusting, this 100 billion isn't even going to be in the top 100, because the rest, the 95% of the capitalization of the stock of SpaceX are basically locked up for at least 180 days, 120 trading days. So when you add weekends, it does become a long time. And the general consensus is that you could have about up to the max of 60% of the shares being, free floating and available to trade. And that's assuming that everyone apart from Elon, who owns 40% of the company, sells or put their shares up for sale somehow. Even then, you will get to about 1.5% of the US total market index. And so when this thing first goes into the index, it's not going to be in the biggest ETF in the world, the Vanguard S&P 500 fund, which is $1 trillion fund. Take a deep breath. The next one, it will go into the Vanguard Total Market, fund, which is about 600-700 billion. Let's just say $1 trillion. I work out that, they would need to buy 0.1, percent of the fund, which is less than $1 billion. And so I'm just like, what is this angst that we're seeing over, how this IPO is apparently, is the end of indexing? I just don't get it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think what might be quite useful out of the SpaceX IPO is, my impression is a lot of particularly retail investors, but probably even advised investors, when they think that they're passively investing, they just think, well, I've bought all world shares. The underlying reality is very different. They may have bought into S&P 500, in which case it's not necessarily the 500 biggest companies, because there's these guardrails that were brought in. I think either brought in or certainly tightened up about 10 years ago, weren't they? To make sure that companies were profitable, that there was enough of the company you could buy, that effectively the founder didn't still retain complete iron grip on the company. So there were just three sort of sensible rules. Oh, did I say profitability? Yeah. A quarter of profitability. So actually, this might be quite useful as an illustration as to why, even within indexing is not indexing. Because the other point is you could be indexed to a different provider, right? So as you just said, I think FTSE Russell will be buying SpaceX towards the end of the summer, won't they? It'll be 3 months, whereas the earliest S&P will be June, July next year, so 27. So there's a huge, yes, it's a tiny part of indexing, and also you've got to understand what you're indexing and the rules with the index that you're buying into. If you're an end client, you probably need to ask your advisor, and in the case of some advisors, they may not know without going and looking at it. So we know the buying points for all of the solutions that we've got when they'll be getting into SpaceX. A bit dependent on profitability. It's really surfaced some interesting points, I think, about how not all investing is the same.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting because when you actually break down the numbers, it's not a massive part. I think kind of more from a retail perspective, a lot of the noise is that people don't understand how indexing properly works and what they're ending up with. So everyone's assuming overnight they're suddenly going to be buying SpaceX. Yeah. But actually, with all the dealing points and restrictions, it's not going to filter through immediately. And I think the media loves stirring it. Everyone's got their different views, but actually it's such a small part. And I think they've all got their regulations in place to make sure they remain liquid. Fund managers can trade them. So I think in the grand scheme of things, passive is still quite passive, despite what appears to make changes to get big IPOs in. But I think they also kind of, if we look at the big ones listed for the rest of the year, we haven't seen businesses at this scale have IPOs. So with the moving times, it's also something that if they don't make these adaptations, how is these companies ever going to grow and get listed for people to benefit from the uplift of them? So I think it's kind of an interesting topic that's needed to come.
Yeah.
And I think to that point as well, sorry, Abraham, we're not used probably to seeing companies of this size. We're also not used to seeing companies that are this unprofitable. I mean, SpaceX is not really one company. It's three companies. It's the rockets, the satellites, and the AI. And actually, I mean, the rockets makes money. I think that is, the satellites make money. The rockets sort of break even because they're doing nearly 90% of all launches. And the AI hemorrhages money. I mean, it's horrific if you look at the numbers around that one. But actually what people are buying, and because I look at the price and I think I cannot wrap my head. I don't think anyone can wrap their head around the current price based on the current revenues and profitability. However, the market is looking particularly to that profitable satellite bit of the business and thinking, well, actually, so Elon's next great idea is the Dyson Swarm, isn't it? So it's that kind of coverage of the planet in his satellites, which means he'll be inescapable from a purchase point of view. I mean, I can't get flipping mobile signal here in 50 minutes out of Waterloo. It's insane. O2 are a terrible mobile phone company. But as soon as he's created this sort of network of satellites around the planet, we'll kind of have no choice. We'll all be gigabit uplinks through his satellite. So I think that's what the market's pricing it on. It's not what's going on today. It's what's going on in the future. And we're not used to that because S&P 500, you're used to revenue, profitability, blah, blah, blah. He's pretty good at, let's be kind. He's pretty good at making the numbers look good, right? I mean, Tesla's what, 40 billion in public subsidies from the US government, hasn't paid a penny of tax or $1 of tax, I don't think, so far. And listed with a massive, big multiple and a massive valuation. Whatever I think of the man, I wouldn't want to bet against him. I guess that's what it boils down to as an investor. I think that would be a dangerous game to start playing.
Yeah, and haven't you got Starlink at home? No? Or in the office? No?
No, not yet. I'm sure the time will come. I think ultimately we'll all be just using one bit of tech, and it will be, it'll have Elon's signature across it.
Yeah, I mean, we are breaking the cardinal rule of indexing, in this, which is really buy the haystack and don't worry about the needle in the haystack. And historically, I have just I stay away from talking about the individual constituent of the portfolio and all these things. But yeah, so
come on, this one's worth talking about. I mean, we're not going to talk about every
we're breaking
IPO.
that rule. I feel like you almost have to, because otherwise there is just so much misconception out there that just don't stand up to scrutiny. My take ultimately is that whether you buy, one point I wanted to touch on, Matt, that you made, which is, well, indexing is not indexing anymore, and we should, as advisors, we should understand the broad rule of the index that we are tracking. If we are, we should understand them, but I wouldn't obsess about them too much, because we're long-term investors, and the whole concept of buying the A stock is that it will come out in the wash. Now, if you are excluding a broad, a sizable chunk of the market, with direct indexing and all that stuff, as long as you're comfortable with the risk, of potential underperformance, you're doing it on principle, that's good. But I would avoid, but to the extent that you are using the broad index providers, spoiler alert, NASDAQ 100 doesn't count in my mind. I'm talking about globally diversified, portfolio in indices, MSCI, FTSE Russell, S&P. And as long as you're doing that, whether the stock goes in on day 5 or day 12, or indeed, it increases when the lockup ends, understand the rules. I would avoid trying to game it or change your portfolio because of this. It just, it goes against indexing. But one thing we should all keep track of is this point that you made, which is, we're going to have a number of big companies come into the market. They're unprofitable. They may end up being about, 4 to 5% of an a US market, and maybe about 3% of a globally diversified equity portfolio. My guess is that Mr. and Mrs. Miggins in a 60-40 portfolio is probably going to have £1, maybe £1 and 20 pence of £100 in this company. Even if she's 70, is that worth the price of seeing Elon build, storage and data centers in the space in Mrs. Miggins' lifetime, and this promise of AI with the likes of Anthropics and OpenAI, is that worth £1.50 of every £100 that Mrs. Miggins have in her portfolio at the age of 70? Bet you, I think it is. Your call. Anyway, having not done justice to that topic, we probably should move on. Lauren, IHT on pension, set the stall for us.
Yeah, so I think this is one that we've come across a lot of noise on pensions coming into the estate next year and what to do. I've seen a lot of advisors say you just bring it to the front of the queue, but I think there's so much more we could be doing proactively. I think just saying bring it to the front is a little bit of a lazy approach, but there's trust planning out there. There's the impacts of them dying pre and post 75. I think it's an area that I'm really passionate about, because it's not just put it to the front of the queue. It's like, how can you encourage your clients to spend and enjoy that wealth in the right way, in the whole picture? And Standard Life have done a study about how people are now even more reliant on inheritance from families. So kind of just leaving it in the pensions is not the answer now. We've got to get smart about it. And I think it brings the issue forward to, it's not a later life problem. It's when you start accumulating, we've got to have that conversation.
Matt?
Yeah, look, 100%. I mean, this is, I think this one is a topic that's going to start simmering and is then really going to come to a boil in probably Q1 next year. The way they've structured the changes to the rules, you've got some families who are going to be losing 80+% of the pension fund on death. And actually, it is on topic, but we blogged about it recently. We've started to see and anecdotally hear from other advice firms that they've got clients who are forgoing life-saving, or not life-saving, but life-prolonging treatment now because of this cliff edge on the 5th of April next year. So you've got some really horrific, frankly, trade-offs being considered by some families. Where if you've got a treatment option which will extend your life by 12 months from today, or without treatment, you've got 6 months, and then you've got a 6-figure tax difference for your kids between those two. I mean, I'm nearly, but I'm not quite old enough to be thinking in those kind of terms. But that's really hard. So yeah, I would agree with Lauren. I mean, it is complicated, and what we found, when the changes were originally announced, we sat down and we were like, "All right, okay, everyone, let's get all the advisors in a room, let's work out what our standard approach is going to be." And within about half an hour, you realise there's no standard approach. Every single individual is so different, because you've got to include the family's tax rates, so the kids' tax rates, maybe the grandkids' tax rates, income tax rates. This is, as Lauren said, pre-75 is very different from post-75, when you've got income tax kicking in for the beneficiary, withdrawing from the inherited fund as well. So it gets super complicated. The one thing we are doing, I'd be interested in what Lauren's doing, and Abraham, what you're hearing from other advisors, but we are starting to draw down on pensions for clients with really big estates where it was always going to be surplus to their requirements and they were just leaving it like an IHT free fund, and paying the income tax, cycling some of that surplus income into trusts to retain a bit of control, because there's not a lot else you can do. It's such a cliff edge. You're going from 0 to 40% tax, so in some cases 60% tax on a set point next year. So yeah, I don't know. Those are the conversations that we started to have and the planning we started to do. I don't know what you guys are experiencing.
This is where I lose 99.9% of our audience.
Oh, here we go. He's going to say he likes tax. Lauren, you ready for this?
I don't like tax, but I actually like this rule, this change. Yes, so everyone hates me for that now. Thank you very much. I understand that. I am now Billy No Mates. I like this rule because it forces everyone, families, with substantive assets in pension, financial planners, providers, everyone now needs to have a proper plan around this. The other bit I also like, Lauren, you should like this with me, which is like I know TFP, is big on this thing about helping clients enjoy life when they can with the assets that they have accumulated. This forces that conversation. And if the thinking is for many people, for many households about being able to give money to the next generation, it forces the thinking, the planning on how we do that giving with warm hands, not cold ones. But of course, I know that life isn't that, isn't deterministic. There are worries that people have about, will they have enough if they give too much away? All of these conversations. But we need to have it. It can no longer be the big giant elephant in the family room, in the, when it comes to intergenerational planning. Because guess what? If you don't have that plan and don't talk about these things and explore what you need to do, well, Mrs. Reeves is coming for you. So I like that, that it forces action. There are things that still, I think, need to be corrected in the rule. I mean, there is no just world where anyone should be facing 80%, 70%, tax. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And so I hope they will correct this. Forgive me. I'm not trying to downplay anyone's pain, but like these edge cases, maybe it's not edge, maybe it's not an edge case, but these scenarios just need to be corrected. But the overall direction, and there are tools now, flexible reversionary trust is coming to the scene, and we'll see where all of that land. But there are planning opportunities, and as a profession, we shouldn't we need to get our competence and up to scratch in this area. And then of course we need to have plans to talk to clients about it, which you guys are already doing by the looks of it.
I have to agree with you, Abraham. I don't think it's not a bad tax isn't what I want to say, but it's definitely got people thinking I could pay 40% on this now and enjoy it, or 40% for my loved ones. So for us, it's really triggered some good conversations. I think the more we dive into it with clients, there's still some points there that feel really raw for people, that they're saying it's a tax on unspent pension funds. But if you pass away before you're old enough to access it, is that unspent when you haven't had the opportunity? And I think there's definitely, with our clients, that's like the questions that are going through for their kids and things, that putting all this money into pension, but what if they don't get to enjoy it? Is that still falling part of the rules? And I think, again, with the whole piece, how they're going to administer paying the tax on the pension, it's still an issue that's more complicated than I think anyone wants to believe, and that the pension industry takes a long time to unpack stuff. I know they've given a long running period, but just to suddenly say, oh, this portion's going off to them, this portion's going up to them, and working out the tax bill, I think it's going to add a lot of pressure and upset during a really hard time when someone's passed away, trying to process the money. So I think that's what we're most intrigued to see fall out, what they're going to do handling that.
Yeah, look, so I don't like to agree with Abraham on these podcasts if I can possibly avoid it. But I wasn't objecting to pensions coming back into the IHT net. I was objecting to the double taxation, Abraham. I think that's the bit I object to. I mean, look, I've forever telling people on this podcast how long I've been advising for. I try and avoid it, but over half my advising career so far, pensions have counted in the estate for IHT. It's a relatively recent development. It's just been the last 10 years. So I don't mind. But, if you pay IHT on a GIA or share portfolio or whatever, the CGT is wiped out. That's then your trade-off.
Yeah.
Do you tell the client, okay, look, you're going to have to pay 24% CGT now so you can encash it, so you can give it away? I mean, there's avoidance that you can do, but broadly, take your 24% now to avoid 40% later. To my mind, pensions should be the same. You can pay the income tax now and give it away if you choose to. But if you don't, there isn't going to be the income tax charge for your beneficiaries, for the kids, for the grandkids, but there will be inheritance tax. It's this doubling up of tax, this is the problem. Successive chancellors have just layered more rules over the existing set of tax rules, and then they don't understand why taxpayers find it so complex to navigate and why they're all grumpy about it. I think if there's a sense of simplicity and fairness in our taxation system, then people would be a lot happier to pay their tax. Maybe that's a bold statement, but that's the issue as I see it. I saw the Lauren's point about the standard life research. I saw that the Gen Z, I think, have got huge percentage rates of responding to that survey, saying, yeah, basically the only way I can retire is I'm relying on an inheritance from my parents. And even Gen Xers, which is really bad because Gen Xers are fast closing in on retirement, that they're saying it. I do wonder, I mean, I love Standard Life and I like the work they do, policy research stuff they do. But I do wonder, I mean, if you ask a young person, you know, what are you going to have in retirement? I think the one thing they will misunderstand is benefit of compounding with their pension contributions. They'll have a tiny bit in their pension. They won't translate that into some big future pot that's going to look after them. I think that's one of the fundamental issues with misunderstanding compounding. So they're looking around and they see mum and dad are in a nice house and they think, well, that'll be it. That'll be what will cover my retirement. So I don't know. I don't think it's quite as bleak as that research made out, maybe. But yeah, well, I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Lauren, your generation will be fine. Says Boomer Matt.
Boomer? Hang on a minute.
Messing with you.
I'm borderline millennial, by which I mean I'm Gen X, but in denial.
All right, Boomer. Going to the last topic of the day, which is a cheerful one. Matt, deepfakes.
Yeah, so I just thought I'd bring this to the table because I think this is extraordinary. So 2025, they've had a little tally up and they think that the money lost in fraud, just the deepfakes, so not fraud as the general category, just the deepfake technology was $1.1 billion US. And the projection is for 2026, because it's one of those steep J curves, it could be $40 billion US. Now, they define deepfake as either an AI-generated video, AI-generated audio, or AI-generated image of someone. So it has to be impersonating someone for it to count under this number. And I think there's a couple of points I'd make here, and then I'll see what you guys think about this one. So the first is that, but if you look at the US numbers, 1/3 of $1 billion, so just short of 1/3 of that money lost, was fraud committed against corporates. So it was people in companies in the US getting defrauded by getting conned by a deepfake. And I don't know if the two of you remember, but there was is it funny? I don't know if it's appropriate to be funny or not, but there was a famous case late 2024 where an accounts assistant I think it was in the US, was on a Teams call, a Microsoft Teams call with their CEO, their CFO, and their department head from the accounts department, and they transferred something like 200 million out of the company account to a third party. And it turned out that of the 4 attendees in the Teams meeting, they were the only human being. The other 3 were AI generated, which is extraordinary when you think that the AI was being able to generate the video and the audio sufficiently to con someone who knew the individuals that were supposed to be on the team meeting. So that's mad. So I think from an SME advisor business point of view, we do need to be conscious of that. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of advisors listening go, oh, that can, all my staff are far too bright to fall for that, and I'm far too bright to fall for that. Well, I'll tell you, it's worth listening to the Peter Diamandis Moonshots podcast a couple of episodes ago, where he gets together like the biggest brains in AI and some of the biggest private investors. And one of the guys on there said, yeah, it's happened. I had a call from my finance person saying, oh, yeah, don't worry, I've transferred that money. And he was in the middle of a board meeting, hung up, and then he was sat there in the board meeting thinking, hang on, what money? So, and it turned out that, so this is an AI company. It's a big private investor that got scammed. So there's that point. And then I think the other point, which is perhaps more subtle, is I think for the private clients, so for our clients, they're going to be more vulnerable to this stuff. And so as advisors, I think because this is money, it's incumbent on us to start communicating with our clients and just explaining how this stuff works and trying to protect them from it. And also, I think we're going to find it harder to gain trust with people when we meet them for the first time, because people will start to get deeply, deeply mistrusting of even even a video call. For all I know, I could be the only human on this one. I might be getting scammed for recording this podcast. I've got no way of authenticating that particularly. So I think people will become less and less trusting, probably harder and harder to move from financial firm to financial firm. So there you go. Three big issues in this one, I think.
Yeah, I think AI is amazing what it can do, but it's scary. I find myself quite often scrolling through news and you kind of looking at it going, is that really real, or is this an AI joke now? And you're almost embarrassed to ask. I find myself doing that before. I'm reading through something and I'm like, I should be smart enough to know if this is real or not, but I'm really doubting my ability to judge what is real and what's not. And I think some of them I find hard, where you hear that someone was talking to Brad Pitt and he needs their life savings. Like, sometimes you almost feel like it's an educational piece, but it's hard. And the numbers are crazy when you look at how much has gone out of corporates in America, and you think they'd have that structure to set up in a way that wouldn't happen. But I completely agree. It's a massive educational piece, even for smaller investors, how quickly they can get your details, make things look real. And with our jobs, there's an element of trust more with existing clients, that if you've got an email saying we've done this, I don't know how many of them would be like, oh, I should check about that kind of thing. So they just assume you're looking after it all. But I think it's a massive area of worry for people.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing that struck me, I thought that was where you were leaning, Matt, which was, there were categories of this fraud, deepfakes. But investment in the US, investment was the second largest category. So you have investment, you have corporate scams. So investment is the second largest category, about $223 million there. Now, in the UK, it is the largest category for the UK. So in total, the UK, there's about $150 million lost in the UK to deepfakes, and 122 of it is investment related. So we all should be thinking, we should get our, thinking hearts on about how we make sure that our clients are educated, are protected, and indeed, as you said, our organizations are protected from this. Maybe one thing I would say on the optimistic side, actually two things. One is that I am actually hoping that technology will be part of the solution. In other words, AI will be part of the solution to this. We saw something last week with Mythos, which is, Anthropic's supposed to be most, security conscious AI, is meant to be able to find vulnerability in your technology stack. And what they did was to release a version of it to everybody. And the most powerful version of it, they gave to security, organizations, companies who are into digital security. And then the US government somehow found a vulnerability where you could jailbreak the, let's call it the general public version, to do what the most capable version can do. And so the US government issued an order to actually get them to take it out of production. So my point is that I am hoping that, AI will be part of the solution to this, but also there are parts of me that says actually in-person, analog type, not just processes, but also meetings will become more and more important. I can easily see a scenario where somebody says to their client, if you're going to invest any money until we know what's going on, you and I need to sit down in the office to, to sign the document and make the investment. I can see this type of thing, or like in an organization where you say above a certain threshold, I don't care if I am in Tokyo or the US and money needs to be paid. You and I need to get together, 2 people, 3 people in the organization have to get together physically, to authorize payment over a certain level. I'm just speed. I don't know. I'm just like freelancing here. I don't know what the ultimate solution is, but I suspect that more digital, more in-person interactions will become more and more valuable as we go into this into this agentic world.
So, so your theory is AI is going to make us less productive and profitable as advisors because we have to go back to face-to-face physical
That's not quite what that's.
everything.
No, you'll do the grunt work, but there will be areas, areas of high stakes that,
yeah. It means Lauren and I can't run volume businesses. We've got to focus on a small number of clients that we know well and meet them face to face.
Yeah. I think we already did that version of the SoapBox. Anyway, Lauren, it's been fantastic to have you on the pod and the show. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. Matt, as usual, as always, thank you. Insightful stuff, guys. Thank you very much.